Have you ever experienced a moment of tranquility that was unsettling? An unsettling tranquility hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of the hospital. The sterile corridors echoed with an eerie silence, punctuated only by the murmurs of patients scattered throughout the facility. This fragile semblance of peace shattered with the arrival of a gurney bearing a woman in the throes of childbirth. Her scream, raw and primal, ripped through the sterile atmosphere, transforming the silence into a symphony of chaos. Within the maternity ward, a frantic ballet unfolded. A monstrous entity, a grotesque mockery of humanity, began to emerge from the woman. Grotesque bulges erupted on her abdomen, pulsating with an obscene life of their own. A doctor, emboldened by a misplaced sense of duty, reached out to prod the protrusions. His fate was sealed in a blink as his skin erupted in a geyser of gore. The monstrous entity, a grotesque and horrifying aberration of nature, lumbered forth with unnerving speed. Panic erupted, a cacophony of shouts and frantic footsteps echoing through the corridors. The creature turned its attention to the remaining patients, its luminous yellow eyes boring into them with a predatory focus. The hospital, once a beacon of hope and healing, was now a playground for this monstrous entity. One elderly woman fell prey to the creature, her head detached from her body in a sickening spray of viscera. A young nurse cowered behind the reception desk, a witness to the unspeakable horror. The creature devoured the pensioner with a sickening relish, the rhythmic slapping of its legs the only counterpoint to the nurse's ragged gasps. Panic gnawed at the hearts of all who found themselves trapped within the hospital's walls. A student retreated to the sanctuary of a restroom stall, desperately willing himself to believe this a macabre dream. His illusion was shattered by the chilling thumps echoing through the corridor. Another student, separated from his friend in the chaos, discovered the cold embrace of death. His phone, a testament to his desperate attempt to flee, lay shattered on the floor beside his lifeless form. The aftermath of the chaos was a gruesome tableau of death and despair. The hospital, once a symbol of healing and hope, was now a testament to the monstrous entity's reign of terror. The unsettling tranquility was replaced by the deafening silence of death. The monstrous entity had left its mark, a grotesque testament to the horror that had unfolded. The once bustling hospital was now a graveyard, its sterile corridors echoing with the screams of a day that would forever be etched in the annals of horror. What if you were to encounter a creature from the abyss? Imagine, if you will, a being so monstrous, so grotesque, that it defies all natural laws and understanding. A creature that toys with its prey, batting away a scalpel with a casual flick of its clawed limb. Its guttural growl, a sound so terrifying it sends shivers down the spine of the bravest of men. Imagine a doctor, his bravado shattered, whimpering for mercy on the cold, sterile floor. The creature, impervious to his pleas, rips him limb from limb with a horrifying casualness. Suddenly, the wail of sirens reaches a crescendo, and the flashing red and blue lights cast an eerie dance of shadows on the hospital's facade. 4 police officers, armed and ready, cautiously enter the hospital. The sterile atmosphere is thick with the stench of decay and the ever-present threat of unseen horrors. They navigate deserted corridors, the silence broken only by the rhythmic click of their boots on the polished floor. The gruesome evidence of the carnage unfolds before them. Blood-soaked walls, scattered body parts, and a chilling miasma of death that hangs heavy in the air. Finally, they stumble upon the source of the macabre symphony. A monstrous entity feasts in the central lobby, bathed in the garish glow of emergency exit signs. It has grown larger, its body a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and bone. This is no longer a creature of flesh and blood, but a horrifying testament to a warped and alien biology. The officers open fire, a hail of bullets ripping through the air, slamming into the creature's grotesque form. But the bullets have little effect, leaving only superficial wounds on its hide. A desperate struggle ensues, a clash between humanity's finest and an unspeakable entity from the abyss. As the officers empty their magazines, a deafening roar shatters the air. The creature, its body pulsating with an unnatural energy, unleashes a wave of putrid energy. The officers are thrown back, their screams merging with the cacophony of terror that resonates within the hospital walls. The creature, its hunger momentarily satiated, turns its gaze towards the flickering emergency exit lights. With a chilling intelligence, it seems to understand that escape is imminent. It lumbers towards the exit, its grotesque form a harbinger of the horror to come. The fate of the city, perhaps even the world, hangs in the balance. What will happen next? What horror awaits beyond the hospital walls? Only the creature knows. And it's not telling. Fade in. Have you ever felt a fear so intense that it paralyzes you? Picture this. A suffocating silence descends. A student, blissfully unaware, feels a tremor of unease inch up his spine. His trembling hand pushes open the stall door and peeks out. His heart pounds a frantic tattoo against his ribs. Suddenly, the deceptive calm shatters. A grotesque arachnid monstrosity drops from the ceiling, its elongated, wickedly curved claws reaching out to engulf him. The student chokes back a scream as the creature's fetid breath washes over him. The stench, a sickly cocktail of decay and metallic tang, sends shivers down his spine. He squeezes his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, only to be plunged into an abyss of eternal darkness. Cross-dissolve. Cross-dissolve transition. Fade into a separate scene, where a second student roams the vacant hallways, his voice rough from calling out for his missing comrade. Holding tightly to the ragged hope that this is all a dream, he pinches himself over and over in a vain attempt to ward off the terror. To his only remaining aim feels formidable within the enclosed hospital. A heart-tearing shriek shatters his delicate optimism. The basic pull of curiosity grapples with the survival instinct, leading him towards his end. Fade to black transition. As the screen fades out, his fate remains uncertain. Fade in from black. A group of burly construction workers attempt to fight back against the monstrosity. Their imposing physiques promise a semblance of resistance, but the creature, fueled by an insatiable hunger, proves unstoppable. It grows with each kill, its body morphing grotesquely as it devours. A hapless worker finds himself the target of its grotesque appetite. The creature's jaws clamp down with bone-crushing force, severing the man's torso in a single, sickening motion. The remaining workers watch in paralyzed terror as their comrade is reduced to a mangled pulp. The creature, its 3 pairs of eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence, fixates on the next victim, a lone, trembling worker. Cross-dissolve 2. Cross-dissolve transition in common sense. A voice long drowned out by primal terror finally flickers back to life. He understands the futility of resistance, the folly of hoping for external aid. Sirens faintly in the distance offering a flickering ember of hope. Perhaps help is on its way. Fade to white transition out. The screen fades in from white, revealing a different drama within the hospital walls. The creature, having devoured the construction crew, now focuses on a lone doctor who has barricaded himself within a storage closet. As the creature's assault splinters the flimsy door, the doctor is showered with debris. He huddles the corner, his eyes wide with terror as the creature towers over him. Desperate for survival, the doctor lunges for a scalpel, its glint a feeble beacon of defense against the daunting monstrosity. The scene closes with a cross-dissolve transition. Cross-dissolve begins. In the end, the hospital stands as a testament to a night of unparalleled horror. The silence that once suffocated now echoes with the screams of the victims. The creature, satiated, slinks back into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a collective trauma that will linger for generations. The question remains, when will the silence descend again? Fade out, transition start.